See, I was, as I told you, I've never been to any school, so I had to take care of myself. And when I was 16 years old, I was thrown out of school because I had managed to make myself a key to the physics room and had started to make explosives. And we blew up like roundabouts and small parts of roundabout I blew up. And we got to the papers and things. It was action-packed years. But when the school found out that that was what we were doing in the physics room, we had the key so we could log ourselves in after the school were closed. Then they were like, this is no good, get out. And then I went out and anyway, so I've never been to school. So I had to make an income somehow, and I decided that I was relatively good at computers. So I got a job as a programmer for Lego, the brick company, and I was working on that thing called Lego Mindstorms, which is this Mindstorm robotic building set where you can. They said you could make robots, but you could basically make automata in toy form. But it's done later. Part of it went into it. It's done. Anyway, I did that, and then I was later on employed by Nokia, and I worked on cell phones. And that was the last part of my teenage years. I was what you today call a nerd. And in those days, it wasn't fancy. I mean, it was. But anyway, I made my own living and blah blah. And aside from that, I made techno music, as they say in Holland. They can't say the T, so they say techno. I like that one, techno. So I was in the. That's all. I mean, I was relatively successful. I mean, I managed to travel around the world and blah blah blah, and play my music and these sort of things. And I moved here. I moved to London when I was 19 years old, and I think it went all right. But I was also terribly self-destructive. I throw myself out of windows, out of cars, whatever I could throw. I had a bad habit of throwing myself out of whatever I could throw myself out of. It was all right. I mean, I'm not going to detail. I mean, that was how it was. And so I had a successful music career, if you like. But I also had an action-packed life, and that's all right. I'm not the first person in the world to have that, so there's nothing interesting there. The only reason why I'm telling you that is because I'm going to tell you how I got my first lecture ever. And that happened because in 2000, and I think it was 2002 or 2003, who the F knows, but it doesn't really matter. I was in Hackney, and the reason why I was in Hackney was because I had moved out of London and moved back to the Faroe Islands, and there was an American lady that had moved in to, a place in Hackney, which I knew people living, flat share sort of thing. And she had lived there for a whole year, and when she wanted basically to go back to America, I decided, well, I should probably pay her a visit. Why not? I mean, so I decided to pay her a visit, and I came to her house, and I realized one of my Scottish friends called Alan Gordon was going out with her. And that was fine. I mean, I had no problem with that. I mean, it was all right. He was a good friend of mine, so wow. And he was a kind of a shy computer guy too. He had never had girlfriends, so that was complicated. But Alan had another friend, which was called Alan, his best friend. And there was an Alan, and there was an Alan, so there were double Alan. And his best friend were a charmeur. He was a charlatan. He was the ladies' man. And throughout the night, the other Alan kind of took shy Alan's girlfriend over to her and was knocking her in the kitchen and things like that. Rock and roll, useful lifestyle. And I didn't like that. I didn't. I thought there was something wrong because this is the love of the little shy Alan's life. I thought. So I tried to stand up and say, no. But I had also been under influenced by alcoholic drinks at that time. I usually don't drink, but when I drink, I drink quite a bit. That's why I don't drink, because I usually end up at the hospital if I drink. But anyway, I had drunk alcohol that night. And I was drunk. Not that drunk. But these Alans were actually both nerds, but there was the clever and the shy Alan. The clever Alan was so clever that he actually had a PhD in artificial intelligence or something which went way over my head. And he started saying reasons why he could take Alan's girlfriend. And he started to talk about quantum physics, and I was like, and I didn't understand any of it. So I was like, but I also knew that I couldn't argue. First of all, my English wasn't that good. Secondly, I was very drunk. And what should I do? So I decided to say, I would rather jump out the window than listening to your crap. And he was like, And then I just opened the window and jumped out. And it wasn't a big thing, goodbye or anything, it was just I jumped out. And I fall quite far and broke both my legs and both my arms, and I mean, it was relatively bad hurt. Anyway, that's where the story starts. And I got out of the hospital, wounded all over, and for some weird reason, I decided to cash out my last money and go to America. And why I did that was a stupid idea. But anyway, I flew to New York, and I was supposed to play a gig at a venue called Tonic. It's closed now. It was the place that was the place after Knitting Factory, but it doesn't really matter. Anyway, it's not the place anymore. I was supposed to. I performed a terrible gig there, and I think I had an idea that I should go on tour, but I was way too. So it didn't happen. I couldn't really tour at the time, and I had a broken leg and all these things. So I decided to stay in New York for a while. And I heard there was a lecture in Princeton, and that lecture I wanted to go to. So I decided that I wanted to get on the train, and I went through New Jersey and to Princeton, and decided to do this lecture at Princeton. Oh, sorry, I didn't decide to go to this lecture, and the lecture was cancelled. And I was like, oh. And then they asked me, and I will never forget them for that. They said, why don't you do the lecture instead? And that was my very first lecture, and that was at Princeton. And I did the lecture, and I heard, I didn't dare to look at anybody. I still don't dare to look at anybody. I'm a very shy person, actually. And I started to hear chairs go like, and everybody left the room. And it was a big disaster. It was a terrible lecture. And afterwards, I was accused of being pro-Israeli Nazi and things like that. I was being accused for being old Europe, wanking, blah 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 blah. These all, everything that and I was very, I didn't like. Anyway. So I remember sitting in the cantina, being like, oh, I should no, out of windows, broken legs, blah blah blah. These sort of things. And a friend of mine's phone rang, and it was from Brown University. And they asked if I wanted to come and do the same lecture there because they heard it was so bad that they said it can't be that bad. So it was, and that is America. That is the cool part of America. That is the, I can make fun of America, but that is, come on, nobody else would. King's College would never do that. Have you heard there was a really bad lecture somewhere in Sheffield? Shouldn't we get that person down here? That would never happen. But anyway, so that's, I don't know. So I went to Brown University and did my lecture, and remember to say, what I'm about to say now is not meant to harm any blah 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 or make fun of any blah 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 blah. And the lecture went much better. Because you have to warn people when in America before you start, because else they might take it serious. You have to say, oh, this is not. If you say, well, you have to. They're saying, this is not coffee. You have to write that on your tea. That's just how it is. You have to do that. Okay, anyway, so here it gets very interesting. Because I managed to basically sneak around inside the academic system of America, and before I went back to Europe, I had lectured at quite a few of the Ivy League schools, etc., and was a fancy player in the academic world, although, I was straight from the streets. They just didn't know. The Americans didn't know. They thought it was, So anyway, I came back to Europe at a time where a lot of things in Europe were about to change. A lot of new people were going into power in politics and blah, 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 blah. And Scandinavia, it was exactly the same. And I came back to Scandinavia at a time where there was a new government. And that new government wanted to get rid of some of the terrible, crazy, ugly, disgusting parts of what socialistic Denmark had produced. One of the things that they wanted to get rid of was a thing called Diem. And this is very interesting because Diem is something that every single city in Europe had since the 50s. That was the Danish Institute of Electroacoustic Music. And you would probably call that today, you would file that under a media lab. But the idea was that if you wanted to work with new media, you could, there was no way that the everyday person had money to work with new sort of synthesizers, etc., so you could basically fill in a form and say, oh, I have this idea for a piece. And you could handle it in to the Danish Institute of Electroacoustic Music, and there would be some weird board that would say, I think this person is allowed to work with this. And then it would give like 2 weeks, and there would be no money involved, but you would have a technician and blah, 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 and then they probably would broadcast it somewhere on the national radio. And every single country in Europe believes that they were the only country that had such a studio. Germany, if you ever heard, there was this great studio where Karl-Heinz Stockhausen worked. England never had anything like it. The Swedes are like, the M studio.